Now we are looking at the specs that have not received very positive changes, have not received very nice improvements coming into Shadowlands. Specs that did need some improvements, some shake-ups in their rotation or in their passives, in their talent trees, and they didn't quite get that. And the video is going to be split into two. One is going to be going over the specs that lost a lot coming into Shadowlands, specs that didn't quite as much need improvements coming into Shadowlands, but rather lost what they had before, which made them worse. And then the other part is going to be specs that are essentially functioning the same as they did in BFA, but they weren't functioning very well in BFA, and they needed the changes and they didn't get them. So this is going to be the divide. It's going to be quite interesting because reading the comments on the previous video, there are a couple of specs here that a lot of people have gone over and sort of ignored, so it's going to be interesting to see your reaction to these specs being in here. So let's start with first the specs that have lost the most, the specs that have been hurt by the change from BFA to Shadowlands because of a power loss rather than a lack of power gain. Now the first one that ends here as a spec that has lost a lot coming into Shadowlands and will be a worse version of a spec compared to the end of BFA is going to be Holy Paladin. The main changes to Holy Paladin is that they lost their entire auras talent row, Devotion, Sacrifice and Mercy, and they were replaced by 3 talents spread in their talent tree: Saved by the Light, Seraphim and Glimmer of Light. Glimmer grew as a spec for Paladin over time. It took a while to become a mainstay. For a while a lot of people thought it was a meme, a joke way of playing Holy Paladin, but eventually it grew traction, a lot of it, to the point that that was basically the only way to play Holy Paladin. With extra borrowed powers, extra essences, Azerite traits, and then corruptions, it made it an extremely powerful build. So powerful that the current day Holy Paladin just clicks Holy Shock as their healing ability. Some Light of Dawn in between, but it essentially trumps everything else. The problem is that coming into Shadowlands you lose most of this. Your Glimmer is back as a talent, but you will lose 30+% haste, you will be losing Ineffable Truth, you will be losing Vision of Perfection, all of the borrowed powers that made this build go into overdrive. Your much higher uptime on Avenging Wrath is going to be gone. Your much shorter cooldown periods between the times you can use Holy Shock, due to your haste scaling on your cast of Crusader Strike, with Crusader's Might reducing the cooldown, all of this is gone. You are effectively playing a 0.7 version of the 1.0 version that you had in BFA. You're just a gimped version of what you were playing in BFA, and it's gonna take a while before you can ramp up with your secondary stats, with your borrowed powers, to the same level you had in BFA. This is why they end up here. They are here because it's a sucky feeling to reach power level 100 at the end of BFA and then be told that you have to play this exact same thing with the exact same style, except you will start from power level 60. Other specs will start from power level 60, but they have a different way of playing, different rotation, they have a couple of new abilities, a couple of new systems into their build. Holy Paladin doesn't. Holy Paladin is the same thing they had in BFA, just weaker. I said before, this is good for the spec. As I said, Holy Shock trumped and cannibalized the entire build of Holy Paladin. You ignored everything for Holy Shock. With this new build, you will actually have to use your Holy Power, you will actually have to use your Light of Dawn, your Word of Glory. It's gonna be better, but it's gonna feel bad. Because you will be used to the way you play in BFA, you will try to do the same in Shadowlands and it won't work. And it will feel bad. That's why, for now, they end up here. Now that you know the requirements to end up in this category, it's gonna be a pretty easy call to mention Protection Warrior. If you thought Holy Paladin lost quite a bit of power coming into Shadowlands, well, whoop-de-fucking-do, Protection Warrior is in the shitter. Protection Warrior was even worse when it came to borrowed powers. Protection Warrior was even worse when it came to viability in BFA. They were not played at the start of BFA, all the way through the middle of BFA. Only after they got access to borrowed powers and a few band-aid patches put on by Blizzard, they became viable. This entire collection of band-aids, which was a collection of essences, Azerite traits and talents, is now gone. Obviously, the essences like Vision of Perfection or Memory of Lucid Dreams are gone, corruptions or extra haste, before it was a Twilight Devastation Fiesta or Versatility Fiesta, they are all gone. And most importantly, talents have been made much worse for Protection Warrior. Some of their mainstay, always used talents, particularly from Mythic Plus, are now fighting against each other. Anger Management is now fighting with Bolster, which you always wanted to take together. Into the Fray is now fighting with Unstoppable Force, which you also always wanted to take together. And the bad, unused talents that you always skipped are now in the same row. So you're forced to take one of the least effective talents that you would have normally skipped in BFA. You couple this with all the borrowed power loss, and it becomes a big problem. They haven't really gained anything coming into Shadowlands that could make them a little bit more unique or change the way they play, as I mentioned. Maybe, unlike Holy Paladin, they are starting to be weaker, but their entire rotation has been, you know, innovated, changed. No, it's the same thing, except weaker, on a similar scale to Holy Paladin. This endless cycle of have a near permanent uptime on your avatar, generate massive amount of rage with a massive spam of Thunderclap, which gives you super high durability because you can spam Ignore Pain. All of that is gone now. You are much slower, you do much less damage, and it's just gonna feel much worse to play at the start of the expansion. And unlike Holy Paladin, where scaling was going to make it better, right now you can't really scale out of bad talent placements or scaling out of missing borrowed powers like essences and Azerite traits that you don't have here. So it is looking bleaker for Protection Warrior right now. Now, it wasn't hard to guess that after Prot Warrior and Holy Paladin, the last of the trio of worst change specs coming into Shadowlands due to power loss was going to be Fire Mage. Fire Mage has lost the Hyper Thread Wrist Wraps from Mechagon, they have lost Blaster Master, they have lost Memory of Lucid Dreams and the ability to use double unused trinket, as so far on the released trinkets in Shadowlands there is nothing like Ajara's Font of Power. This is a similar situation to Prot Warrior, where Fire Mage wasn't really used at the start of the expansion. They were terrible, and then they received a bunch of band-aid fixes through borrowed powers. Fire Mage had the advantage of being a very well scaling into the late game type of spec thanks to their mastery, so this helped them, but what really kicked them into overdrive was the borrowed powers, all these things that are now going to be lost. Beyond the power increase of the double trinket and the power increase of their mastery with Blaster Master, the real kicker was the fact that the Mechagon Bracers and the Memory of Lucid Dreams allowed you a rotation where you could constantly use instant hot streak proccing Fire Blast inside Combustion. So it created this 1-2, 1-2, 1-2 spam, which ended up doing massive damage. What also made Fire Mage so strong and so versatile in old content is the Ignite. Old BFA Ignite used to spread automatically. It required no button from you to help you with the spreading, and now this has gotten completely changed in Shadowlands, because now Ignite doesn't spread automatically. Ignite is spread by Phoenix Flames, which, yes, is going to be baseline for you, but it's going to have the purpose of spreading Ignite. And it has a 25-second cooldown on 2 charges, so it's not that you can spam it whenever you want. Now, having to play Fire Mage is likely going to be better than BFA. You actually have to use your brain, you actually have to think. When you want to spread your Ignite, you have to think whether or not you want to do a Flame Strike based build when you're doing AoE, or if you want to build a massive single target Ignite and then spread it with Phoenix Flames as your sort of AoE. But, similar to Holy Paladin and similar to Prot Warrior, at the start of the expansion you will be miserable. You are generally miserable as a Fire Mage because you scale extremely hard with gear, so at the start of an expansion you are really poor, but considering you also had extra power from all these extra systems from BFA, which are gone now, it's gonna feel even worse. The fact that you will get to max level and start your first piece of content with like 24% critical strike is going to feel horrible. Your low mastery is going to make your Ignite have very little damage at the start. Your combustion windows will feel horrible because you won't have your infinite charges of Fire Blast. You know, 3 seconds into combustion you will have to start hard casting Scorch. Hard casting Scorch inside combustion is something that Fire Mages haven't done in BFA for a year and a half almost. You know, it's just gonna feel bad. You are one of those specs that is going to feel like a worse version of BFA for a long time until you catch up with gear and scaling. You haven't received any other major change besides the fact that you have to have an extra click of a button when you want to spread Ignite. So the remaining core of your build is the same, but it's just much weaker. So it is going to feel worse. Now we move on to the specs that, rather than losing power, and being ruined at the start of the expansion because they lost a lot of borrowed powers from BFA, specs that didn't really receive any change, basically. That they needed, that they wanted, that they required, that they wanted to make them better or more fluid or better at single target because they were very weak, or better at AoE because they were very weak. All this combination of things. First in line is Assassination Rogue. Surprising people, since I haven't seen anyone mention Assassination Rogue. I am personally disappointed by the changes to Assassination, which are nearly none. It's just that Assassination has remained sort of the same for too long, and some of their problems, like complete and total lack of extra cooldowns outside of your Vendetta, complete and total lack of cooldowns outside of your single target Vendetta, because AoE you've got nothing. You're still extremely poor in AoE, you still are extremely poor in burst. Whatever type of burst, you are too slow to ramp up. And this has remained, you know, sort of like a staple of Assassination over time. It was nice that Assassination had a very clear niche. Assassination is more slow, less buttons pressed, more pulling, you know, it's more relaxed, it's more laid back. But, you know, you say it one expansion, and then you say the next expansion, and then you say the next expansion. Now we are at like the 4th expansion that Assassination has been like this. There hasn't been any change. You're still using Mutilate, Rapture, Garrote, and Envenom. I just wish they had gotten something to vary the rotation. You know, an option at least. Something extra. You know, Poison Bomb is still there for some reason. A terrible ability to keep in the game. Venom Rush is an extremely boring ability. Exsanguinate is still the same for like 3 expansions. It hasn't gotten any new change. It's just the same spec, which is going to be fine for a lot of people. But to me personally, I'm a little bit disappointed. I just wish they gotten some new changes. Something to change the spec, because it feels like it's been the same spec forever. Other spec with quite a few lack of changes is Holy Priest. My main gripes with Holy Priest, and looking at the Holy Priest community and what other players, main Holy Priest players, have been complaining about, I just wish Holy Priest had, number one, more survivability and defensives for himself, as well as better raid cooldowns and Mythic Plus cooldowns, any sort of cooldowns basically. I enjoy how Holy Priest plays. I enjoy the way they work with the 2 Holy Words, reducing their cooldowns. I just think it's a very enjoyable playstyle. And even their options in the talent trees are not that boring. Surge of Light, Blinding Heal, Trail of Light, like Mini Beacon. I think they are enjoyable. The problem is their cooldowns. Holy Word Salvation is, again, a bad raid cooldown because it doesn't give you any damage reduction. For how cool it is and how cool the effect is, it's just poor because there is no damage reduction, and it's obviously terrible in Mythic Plus. And then they lack any other cooldown because Divine Hymn and Symbol of Hope have remained the same for like, since I can remember, since fucking Wrath, when I was maining Holy Priest. What makes them so bad is that they are support cooldowns. Divine Hymn increases the healing done to targets by 10%, and Symbol of Hope restores mana to players. This is just useless in Mythic Plus. And it also doesn't help in a raid environment because you're not powering yourself, you're powering your buddies, which is, you know, very altruistic and all, but it's gonna end up hurting you when guilds and groups are looking for classes and specs with strong cooldowns and you don't have them, because all you do is enhance other people's cooldowns. They're just too weak, they need to be changed, they've been the same forever, and so far they're just unacceptable for cooldowns. 5 and 3 minute cooldowns as well, it's ridiculous. Their single target cooldown is no better, because, again, talking about support, Guardian Spirit increases the healing taken by the target by 60%. This is another case of a terrible cooldown, because one of the strongest parts of single target cooldowns is that they give you breathing room. They give you time to do something else, time to maybe DPS in Mythic Plus, maybe top the rest of the group off. Basically to not care about the tank for a little bit, because the tank has a strong defensive on him. Life Cocoon, Pain Suppression, maybe even Blessing of Sacrifice. Something that allows you to not heal him, or maybe not heal him as much. Guardian Spirit is basically telling you, hey, now you have to heal this target a lot if you want to gain any value from this cooldown. It's a very poor cooldown for single target. They have very poor cooldowns for AoE, they have very poor cooldowns for single target, and to top this all off, they have very poor cooldowns for themselves, defensives. Desperate Prayer is awful, and they have got nothing else. So these things are still the same, they haven't really changed, and their lack of cooldowns, lack of powerful cooldowns is very hurtful for a healer, and it's gonna come back to bite Priest again. And another mention of specs that did not receive enough changes into Shadowlands goes to Mistweaver, obviously. Mistweaver has essentially not even changed a thing from their talent tree, besides cool, I guess, things like Mana Tea being off the GCD, but key problems of Mistweaver were things like they're completely non-existent anymore, at least. Fist Weaving. Now Fist Weaving, even with the help of some legendary effects and some talents, doesn't work. The damage is too low. As a result, the healing is too low. Their cooldowns are still pretty weak when it comes to AoE situations. They have Life Cocoon, great. They have extremely solid single target, great. That did not change and did not need to change. What needed to change was their AoE reach. They have struggled healing multiple people at the same time, particularly in Mythic Plus. Their only AoE Essence font has remained terrible. Besides Essence font, they have to use some combinations of spreading, renewing mist, and trying to do AoE healing that way, which has not been facilitated coming into Shadowlands. You can now use a legendary, Tear of Mourning, to sort of help you with this. Your new talent, your new Invoke Chiji, now also helps you even more because it reduces the cooldown of your Enveloping Mist, so you can, I guess, once every 3 minutes use much better AoE than before, but none of this has been improved as a baseline change. And then you still have your problem of your mastery. The mastery of Mistweaver Monk only affects Renewing Mist and Enveloping Mist and Vivify, and it's just not enough abilities. You lose so much value on all your other secondary stats as well as all your other abilities if you were to use mastery, because your mastery doesn't affect enough of your toolkit. Not to mention that this sort of mastery is the type that doesn't work with healing coming from weapon engines, coming from trinkets, coming from, if it was before, Azerite traits and corruptions and essences, now it's going to be from legendaries, from covenant abilities, from conduits. So it's still a very terrible mastery. It hasn't really been changed. Fist Weaving is still not a thing. It hasn't really been changed. They still struggle a little bit more when it comes to AoE healing, and they have to take multiple hoops and jumps around their toolkit to be able to do that, and that's not even good when they do it, so they stay here. And with Mistweaver, we have finished the recap of specs that have lost the most or received the least coming into Shadowlands. We have a nice tidy divide between Holy Paladin, Protection Warrior and Fire Mage for lost power, and then we have Assassination, Mistweaver and Holy Priest for not really that many changes. Now, other specs obviously haven't received many changes, but I felt they were in a better state than Mistweaver and Holy Priest, for example, so they don't need to be on this list. And then other specs, I think they were kings of this list and they would have monopolized the entire video. I'm talking about Survival Hunter and Feral Druid. Those are unfortunately lost causes. They haven't gotten anything, they haven't changed in anything, and they were as bad as they were before. It's hopeless, just don't play them. You have my seal of approval. So don't think that just because some class has lost something or some class hasn't received something, it means they're bad. For example, I still think Mistweaver and, Assassination Rogue are just fine. They're not weak because they haven't changed that much. It's just a little bit disappointing, And with this, I am done. My next video, I think, is going to be about the fun rating for tanks and healers and some other things, assuming Blizzard keeps up with the changes at the rate they have been doing. And in the meantime, see you guys soon. And I'm going to watch the 7th season of House. It's been so long since I watched it.